as we're through 5 stages of the Tour de France, and we've seen a number of different finish scenarios the past few days, GC days, breakaway days, and now today, sprint days. One mental skill that came to mind that I wanted to touch on and can be really impactful for everyone in performing is an athlete's ability to modulate and understand their individual zone of optimal functioning, or IZOF. The sports psychology research refers to this IZOF acronym. It's from a scientist named Yuri Hanin. And what IZOF addresses and discusses is that there's a lot of individuality for each athlete's activation level and zone where they're going to perform best. So more intensity isn't always better. Relaxed isn't always better. There's a lot of variation here. In addition to variability in the individual, there's also a lot of variance in day to day and moment to moment. Take today's sprint stage, for example. The guys had a relatively mellow, calm day. And there were a lot of guys rolling into that finish that they knew they weren't going to help their teammates. They weren't going to factor in. But these sprinters, on the other hand, they had to be dialed into their most absolutely effective zone and level of activation and functioning. And so for this is something that we train and we address. For the first thing that's really important here is the self-awareness to understand what is our optimal zone. Are we our best when we're really 10 out of 10, or are we our best when we're sort of calm and monked out? I remember starting my road racing career and being around road racing teammates, which is a lot different than warming up as a mountain biker when you're kind of all off on your own. I remember looking at my road teammates and seeing so much variability in their pre-race routines. Some were sitting there like a monk, sitting in a chair, calmly breathing. Others were listening to heavy metal headbanging music, or doing sprints on the trainer, or doing jumping jacks. A lot of variability here. What I was seeing here was this individual zones of optimal functioning coming through. And most anyone who's had a number of times competing or experience competing, they kind of have some idea of if they need to be hyped or if they need to be calm. But this also varies day to day and moment to moment. And I like to think of this a little bit as a thermometer. So are you your best? Is your zone of optimal functioning real hot, 9 or 10 out of 10? Or is it a little cool? Is it, 2, 3 when you go into a race? And then the same thing for coming into the finish of a race. What is the situation? What is your zone of optimal functioning going to be on the day in that moment? So how do we do this? The first step of this is we reflect back on past experiences, past performances where we felt like we were operating at our best, really delivering our full potential. And we sort of take a pulse and a temperature check on that. How activated was I? How much arousal? How intense was I? What did that feel like? Not just what did it turn out to be, but what was the emotion of that? What were the physical feelings of that, and some of the mental thoughts to go with that? And once we have an idea of where we operate our best, then we have to understand how we bring our activation and our arousal up and down. And there are a number of ways we can do this. One of the best and most powerful ways to do this is the breath. The breath is the connection of mind, body, nervous system, and has a lot of control over our state of activation, our nervous system activation. So in general, when we're using our breath, if we need to calm down and activate that parasympathetic state, we want to extend and increase the exhale. So in for 4, and then out for 6. That starts initiating this parasympathetic nervous state, brings our level of activation and arousal down. Conversely, if we do shallow shoulder breaths, quick in, quick out, then we're going to activate our sympathetic nervous system and this fight or flight activation state. So if you're in the team bus before a race and you're finding yourself really nervous, heart rate's a little too high, you're a little jittery, a few calming breaths with extended exhale, that'll go a long way. Another technique is just general box breathing, where you equal the inhale, the hold, the exhale, and the hold in a 4-4-4. That also equalizes and can calm the nervous system. So other effective tools for playing and monitoring our arousal state up and down, we can use music. Music's a very powerful tool to bring us up or bring it down. Also, physical movement and activation of muscles and different muscle groups. So when we activate our core muscles, we are actually stimulating an activation. So what you don't want to do before you go to bed when you're trying to lower your activation level is do a bunch of core work. Conversely, if you're falling asleep at school or at work and you're sitting really slouched and your core is not activated, well, that is only contributing to a relaxed parasympathetic state. If you engage the core, contract the core, or do some brief core work, that actually activates you and brings the arousal level up. Other mental performance tools we can talk about later that can also factor into regulating your zone of optimal functioning and your arousal are self-talk, visualization, cue words, mantras. Many of you are familiar with those, and we'll talk more about some of those later. When I think back to my own experience at the Tour de France and other Grand Tours, my version of identifying and modulating my optimal zone of functioning. One of the things that sticks out is me in the bus, and all my teammates will laugh remembering me in the bus doing all sorts of stuff. So I would be doing core work, I'd be doing stretches. I would often even have a power breathe and inspiratory muscle training device where I'd be doing these big, quick inhales and exhales. And I was getting to my optimal zone of arousal and activation relative to the day. Yeah, if I knew we were gonna roll off the line and there was probably gonna be no breakaway or one rider breakaway, I often wasn't doing that stuff. But if it was an uphill start, if I was trying to go in the breakaway, then I knew I had enough awareness for myself and where I needed to be that I needed to do a little more. I wasn't one of these guys that could just sit in the back and be reading his book or listening to some music and go out and step right in the breakaway. At the time, this gave me some grief and I caught some flack for this. My teammates a lot of times would give me a hard time. But what a lot of them, I think, didn't even understand was how much individuality there is in recognizing what our optimal zone of functioning is. Moral of the story, take some pride, take some ownership in where you operate best, and also communicate it. Communicate it to your teammates. This is a conversation that can happen in the spirit of performance excellence and supporting each other. And ultimately, it's up to you to advocate for yourself, tell your teammates what you need, and help them to understand where you're coming from. Maybe you'll even support them to being a little better too. No two situations are the same. Every day, every new challenge at the Tour de France is going to bring a new opportunity, a new demand, and it's going to have you with your hand on that dial, modulating and toggling up and down to where you need to go. So thanks for joining in for this mental performance takeaway. We'll see you later this week.